What's up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is a little bit different from a lot of the other videos that I've done. I've only covered, I think, 2 other cases that are similar to this, and that's because this is a missing persons case, but it's actually a double missing persons case, and that is not something that's very common. Typically, when you see situations like this, there has been some sort of accident, whether a group of friends has gone hiking or on vacation, or there's foul play involved, where a family has, been abducted or murdered and taken off somewhere. So this is definitely something that you don't see every day, and I'm very interested to see what you guys have to think down below. I will say this is one of those cases where it seems kind of blatantly obvious right off the bat, but as I always do, I want to remind you guys to really think from all different angles at this. In my opinion, as equally as this looks like it's obvious, I can also see a very valid reason to some of the bizarre behavior, so I'm interested to see what your opinion and take of this is down below. So let's just go ahead and jump right into the video. So 42-year-old Susan Osborne and her 15-year-old son, Evan Chartrand, went missing from Holtville, Alabama on May 29th, 2017. Now, Evan wasn't Susan's only child. She also had a daughter, but she also was married 3 separate times, and her son and her daughter were from 2 different marriages. From what I'm understanding, she had custody of Evan, and one of her ex-husbands had custody of her daughter. This was just something that I kind of want to clear up real quick because it's kind of confusing when you research online about this, and it made me struggle a little bit with some of the facts that I originally got before I knew this information. So Susan and Evan lived on Waterview Lane in Holtville, Alabama with her husband of 4 years, Jerry Osborne. Jerry and Susan seem to have a really great relationship. Her previous marriages obviously failed, but the one right before Jerry was particularly difficult, at least from the information that I have received from it. She ended up fleeing the home with both of her children and going to another state. I believe her brother had to come and pack her up and take her away because the home situation just wasn't good. It wasn't good for her. It wasn't good for the kids. The utilities were being cut off. She had no money. It just was an unsafe situation. So it wasn't great. And Jerry was almost like this breath of fresh air because he had been in the Air Force and he ended up being discharged, medically discharged, but he went back to work as a 911 dispatcher, and he took care of Susan, at least from what everyone knew. He bought her anything that she needed. He bought Evan anything that he needed. They lived in a nice home that was only about 4 or 5 years old at the point that they disappeared. And he also allowed her to stay home. He convinced her, quit your job, stay at home, I'll take care of you. So that's why it was so odd that Susan and Evan weren't reported missing for 2 months. 2 whole months. And when they were finally reported missing, Jerry wasn't the one to do it. So a lot of you, I'm sure, are wondering, well, how did her family not report her for 2 months? This is insane. Well, the family and Jerry apparently have their reasons as to why it took so long. Susan was a very, very private person, and her family lived states away. And if you have any distant family, even if it's your mom that lives states away, life happens. The older you get, you have your own family, you have your own job, you have your own priorities, you have your own things going on, and it's hard to keep communication, and this was kind of the situation, and Susan liked to keep a lot of things to herself. For example, despite being married to Jerry for 4 years, Susan's mom, Linda, only met him, I think, 2 or 3 times and barely knew anything about him. So this is one reason why it took so long for her to be reported missing, because time passes, it's hard to get back to one another, and unfortunately, it stopped a search happening for 2 whole months. So right after Memorial Day 2017, Susan's mom, Linda, first noticed that Susan wasn't responding. She went to I think, graduation for someone in the family and obviously wanted to show pictures to Susan so Susan could feel like she was a part of it, but Susan wasn't texting back. Now, right off the bat, this wasn't very alarming because of Susan's private nature, and Linda didn't want to overreact and call the cops over a couple of texts that went unanswered, so nothing was really done. But Linda wasn't the only person realizing that Susan was not responding. Susan had a best friend named Holly. Now, Holly and Susan used to live in the same neighborhood. They were inseparable. Susan spent more time at Holly's house than she did at her own house, but right before Memorial Day, Susan's best friend Holly moved to Florida. And after this, Susan stopped responding to any of her calls, any of her text messages, any of her emails. She just kind of went quiet. And Holly, again, at first assumed, maybe she's pissed. Maybe she's mad that I moved away and she just needs some time and she didn't want to push her and make her uncomfortable. She honestly believed that if she gave her a little bit of time, she would come around and everything would be okay. But weeks kept going and Susan still never responded. And finally, it appeared as if Susan's phone was disconnected. And this is when I think Holly and Linda started to get an idea that something could potentially be wrong. Linda decided to go ahead and try to reach Susan by mail. She figured, a million things can happen to a phone or a phone plan. Maybe there's money struggles. Maybe they switched plans. Maybe something happened. She tried to get in contact with Evan by phone, and Holly did as well. And this is when they realized that Evan's phone was also disconnected. But unfortunately, because neither of them knew Jerry very well, they also had no idea how to get in contact with him. So at this point, things are kind of strange because both Susan and Evan aren't responding. Their phones are disconnected, but everyone's almost positive that if anything had happened to them, Jerry would have contacted them and he hadn't. So no one really knew to be all too concerned. That is until Susan's letter that Linda had sent her, her mom had sent her, came back as undeliverable. At this point, it was enough. It had been 2 months, no contact. Things started shutting off left and right. So on July 29th, 2017, Susan and Evan were reported as missing. Authorities went to the family's home on Waterview Lane, and they honestly initially believed this had to be some sort of misunderstanding because, again, Jerry didn't report them as missing. He lived with them. If something had happened, surely he would have. And when they pulled up, they kind of again had their hopes lifted because Susan's car was in the driveway. But when Jerry answered the door, it was very obvious from the smell and his appearance that he had been deep cleaning, and he claimed that Susan and Evan weren't there and they no longer lived there. So authorities are thinking, what do you mean they don't live here? Why haven't you contacted their family? Or why haven't you called police? Like, what do you mean? And his story was that on Memorial Day, Susan decided she was leaving him for another man. Apparently, this man came, picked up both Susan and Evan, and left. And he said the following day they came back, took a couple of pieces of furniture, some personal items, and that was the last time he had seen them. Now, he had no description to give of this man. I think the one he did give was incredibly vague. I don't know if it included the car description. He didn't have a name. So authorities weren't really sure what to believe, but Jerry was very adamant about the fact that both Susan and Evan definitely were still alive. Jerry was able to provide authorities with a receipt, and this receipt was apparently for an oral surgery that Evan was supposed to have and went to, according to him, days after they were last seen. But when authorities looked closer at this receipt, it was actually a charge for missing an appointment. So that was just another thing to add to the list of strange information. Now, while Jerry's story was odd, authorities wondered if some of Susan's history was maybe repeating itself. They didn't know much at this point about how she left her ex-husband, but there was apparently kind of a strange situation, as I said before. But once they looked deeper in, they figured out what I told you guys earlier, that, her brother came to get her. She heavily relied on her family. She'd even gone out of her way to send certified letters to her ex-husband to let him know every step along the way where she was and what was happening. So this was an entirely different situation, and it kind of made it less likely that she just randomly ran off with another man. And to top it off, she had left her daughter behind, and she didn't even tell her daughter anything. So it just wasn't making a whole lot of sense. So Holly also came forward and said that they told each other everything. I mean, Susan had told her some deep, dark secrets that I'll actually get into later on in this video. She never once mentioned that there was another man. At this point, authorities figured, something strange is going on here. He didn't report his wife and his stepson missing. He didn't ever contact her family to figure anything out. If it was her going off to be with another man, he never, from what I know, initiated any sort of divorce or anything that you would expect. And deep cleaning the house, it was just strange. So authorities came back the following day to Jerry's home with a warrant to search it, and they plan on canvassing the neighborhood and talking to neighbors. And again, they found Jerry deep cleaning for the second day in a row. Now, that's already strange, but we all clean our houses, but the information that the neighbors gave authorities made it that much more bizarre that he was deep cleaning for the second day in a row. The neighbor said that during Memorial Day weekend, the same weekend that Susan and Evan supposedly left with this strange man, strange things started happening at the Osborne home. Neighbors said that Jerry started pulling out furniture from the house, like large items of furniture. He would drag them out back and he started taking them apart and burning them in a 50-gallon drum. One of the items that he supposedly burned matched the description of Evan's bed. He burned the bed frame, he burned the mattress, he burned the linens, he burned absolutely everything. And the neighbors said there were even other items as well that he was getting rid of that were very obviously items that belonged to both Susan and Evan. He burned so many items and burned for so long that the whole entire neighborhood was covered in the thickest smoke. Even 5 houses down, the neighbors couldn't go outside. They couldn't enjoy their Memorial Day time. Everything smelled like burning plastic. It was a nightmare. Once everything was burned, they noticed something else strange. Jerry started renovating the entire home. This house was only 4 to 5 years old. He ripped out all of the hardwoods, put in new carpet, he painted the walls, got all new furniture. It was bizarre. Susan had just painted and kind of redone the house a little bit just months before, so it didn't make sense that he would renovate the entire house, and to top it off, he did every single thing by himself. He never hired help, he denied any offered help. That's a big freaking task. So at this point, things are definitely getting strange. The situation's bizarre, the circumstances are bizarre, Jerry's behavior is absolutely bizarre. And the more that Susan's family gives the authorities information, the more questions there are. 2 other things were missing from the home. Susan's beloved dogs. She loved these 2 dogs more than absolutely anything, and they were not in the home. And at first, that makes sense. If she ran off with another man, she would take the dogs. But then they're thinking, okay, so she took the dogs with her but didn't think to inform her daughter. That doesn't make sense. And then they also found out, no, she didn't take the dogs with her because on July 12th, both of them were surrendered to the local shelter by none other than Jerry. So now she has abandoned her husband, she has abandoned her dogs, she's abandoned her family, she's abandoned her daughter, and just fallen off the face of the earth to disappear with some unknown man. And somehow in all of this, Evan is agreeing with it, not contacting anybody, and not popping up anywhere. Authorities were starting to believe foul play was potentially involved, but if it was and Jerry had anything to do with it, he made sure to get rid of every single bit of evidence down to the floorboards of the house, quite literally. When they asked him why he felt the need to renovate, because, if you've just had your wife leave you, why would that be the first thing you would do? His explanation was that his parents actually suggested it. He said that Susan had spray painted vulgar phrases and things all over the walls, and he didn't like what she had done with the house and he wanted a fresh start after everything. So they really suggested, hey, you know what, go ahead, redo everything, make yourself feel better, get rid of all the vulgar stuff, burn her stuff, do whatever you need to do. But authorities weren't buying it because, again, if Susan had just left to go be with some man, why would she feel the need to totally go dark on everybody? There was no activity on her cell phone after this point. Her bank cards, she would have still had them. They weren't found within the home. Yes, he did eventually shut the phones off, but that took a couple of weeks. So why wouldn't she have used those at least in the meantime? And then on top of that, why wasn't she using any social media? And it didn't make sense for her to just not contact her family. It's not like her family was over the top in love with Jerry. They barely knew him. So it's not like there's a matter of judgment here really, or, them being upset with her for leaving Jerry. They didn't know Jerry, so it didn't make sense that she would want to hide from her family as well. So they decided to contact the State Bureau of Investigations because they were hoping to find some sort of evidence potentially within the Osborne home, but once they saw all the renovation happened, they knew they needed bigger technology. So the State Bureau of Investigations brought in luminol, and that house lit up. There were 20 different signs of blood in the kitchen, the laundry room, and the guest bathroom. And the State Bureau of Investigations even said it looked like a slaughter. It looked like a murder scene. This is not a scenario where it was an everyday injury within the home that blood got, in some areas. It was a lot of blood. So at this point, they think they've hit the jackpot. So they take all of this and they try to send it off to be tested for DNA. But because of all of the chemicals likely and all of the different things that Jerry did to the home, the DNA results came back as inconclusive. They have no idea whose blood this is. There is no way to prove that it's Susan's or Evan's. But the frustrating thing is that they know it exists. They also decided to bring in cadaver dogs to see if they could find any other possible physical evidence. And sure enough, 2 of the dogs hit to the 50-gallon drums out back where Jerry was burning things. And just to be clear, cadaver dogs trace the scent of human remains. So it's not like they're just smelling, Evan's bed, like the scent of Evan. It is specifically human remains that they track. But unfortunately, because everything in the drum had been burned, they weren't able to find anything. So they are just desperate for information, and Linda ends up coming forward with the jackpot again. She said that there was another way they could check to see if anything happened to Susan and Evan around the home, in the home. She said that Jerry had a huge surveillance system, like absolutely massive surveillance system. And she remembered this vividly because there was a camera at every window, every door, everything was monitored. And she remembered asking Susan if that was necessary. She remembers thinking it's absolute overkill. There's no reason to have this many cameras. So authorities went to go check, but you better believe that for some reason on June 1st, days after Susan and Evan were last spoken to, he for some reason went out and destroyed that security system and got an all new system. So anything that happened that might have been caught on camera, authorities no longer had access to. So at this point, the situation's definitely odd, but it could absolutely be just a scenario of a man that's upset that his wife left him for another man. If you think about all the juvenile things you do when you're upset after a breakup or, after a divorce, some people just get angry. They burn things, they, change everything around them, and this easily could be explained by that. The one hang up that I personally will say is, why would you need a new security system? Why would you need a new camera setup directly afterwards? I can understand being angry and burning things that belong to your ex-wife that just left you or things like that, but I find it funny that the first thing he did after they went missing was get a new surveillance system. To me, that seems like one of the first steps you would do if you wanted to hide something. But another huge problem authorities had was motive. Even if they did find physical evidence, they didn't know why on earth Jerry would possibly want to get rid of his wife, get rid of his stepson, but Holly seemed to have a potential answer for this. There had been multiple text messages between Susan and Holly in the few weeks, potentially months, I'm not really sure, I couldn't get a time frame before her disappearance, but I do know these were emails that Susan wanted to keep secret. When this thread of emails started, she said that is where her and Holly could talk about things that were personal and private because Jerry, according to her, was very, very controlling. And she said that he also went through her phone all the time. So she could only say certain things to Holly over text. And she revealed something huge right before her disappearance. Susan said that she somehow found Jerry on a male escort website. She had no question in her mind at all that it was him. He had very specific tattoos. All the tattoos that she found in these ads matched Jerry's tattoos. and she was beside herself. She was distraught. She had been lied to. She had been cheated on. She didn't know if he was practicing, safe measures while this was going on. She didn't know if he was still doing it, how long it had been going on. She had basically planned that she was going to leave him. She was so upset, but she told Holly it was going to take a lot. She had no money of her own. He monitored everything, so she would have to get a job without him questioning it. She would have to earn money from that job and then put some aside without him knowing about it, because she wanted to make sure that she had a safe kind of barrier around her and Evan before she left the marriage. She said, I can't leave this marriage safely right now. There are steps I have to take before I can. But shortly after deciding that she was going to leave Jerry, Susan emailed Holly again and said that her and Jerry had reconciled and she loved him too much to leave him and they were going to try to work it out. Now, the way that's worded makes me think that he found out she knew or she told him. I don't think you'd use the word reconcile unless there was a falling out to begin with, but I can't say that for sure. That's just me reading into the language. But she said they were going to make it work, and Holly, being the great friend she was, just wanted to support all of Susan's decisions. But unfortunately, this could have meant him finding out something he didn't want anybody to know, and maybe she wasn't even the one to send that email. Maybe this is what started this entire situation. At this point, nobody seems to believe that Evan and Susan are alive anymore, and police have said it's very likely they will be looking into this as a homicide situation, but right now they just have no evidence. There is nothing showing that Susan and Evan have popped up anywhere. Let's say Susan did leave Jerry for this man. It's very likely, first of all, that this man was local because she couldn't really talk to anyone else on her phone. He would have found it. There was this string of secret emails that she was sending Holly. Maybe she emailed someone from afar, met someone online, but I feel like authorities would have found that in their searches and they would have been able to say it was a possibility she ran off with another man. So that kind of leaves face-to-face contact, but I don't know how often she got out. And, I don't know how she could have planned something without being able to speak to someone over the phone or through emails or texts or anything. And if this person was local, that means you would expect Evan to show up for school. He was supposed to start his sophomore year of high school at Holtville High School in the next fall, but he never showed up. No one ever called to say he wouldn't be attending. No other schools ever called to ask for his transcripts. So that means he can't go to school anywhere because no one's tried to get those transcripts. He could potentially be homeschooled, but that just throws like a whole other situation into the mix. And to top it off with Evan, he takes prescriptions. He has prescriptions that he takes on a regular basis, and he never refilled anything. Now, I don't know if these prescriptions are detrimental to his health. I don't know if it would be a life or death situation going without them. But you just have to think of it in the sense of, according to Jerry, she simply left to be with another man. Why would that then mean your child stops going to school, doesn't take their medication, doesn't show up to set up appointments? Why does that mean that you stop talking to your family, you leave your daughter behind, you leave your dogs behind? The situation just doesn't add up at all. While it is possible that she did run off, there's just too much strange information pointing to other possible scenarios. I know right now that Jerry is a person of interest in the case, but he has never been labeled a suspect, and those mean two entirely different things. A person of interest could just be someone that knows information that they need to tell you. That doesn't mean they're guilty of anything, so just keep that in mind. But authorities have said that they found something very strange on Jerry's computer, and they won't say what. The only thing that they will say is that this is something that an average person would absolutely not be searching ever. So because they won't release it, I strongly believe it's to protect the integrity of the case, meaning it is something a lot more damning than all the other damning information that they found. All I can think about is that they've released about the blood, they've released about, burning things in the 50-gallon drum, all of this information that already makes him look very, very questionable. So I can only imagine what they found on his computer if that's the information they're not willing to share. I think they're just waiting to find something else, possibly remains, or something. Because like I said, at this point, I don't think anyone really believes that either Susan or Evan are alive. Now, the difficult thing about this situation is that it can just be a scenario. All of Jerry's actions could potentially, and I say that like very loosely, at least in my opinion, could potentially be explained away as he was upset. You know, if you find out that your wife is leaving you for another man, despite it being a very juvenile approach to the situation, I just think about high school relationships, and I think about how some people react in these scenarios. You might want to rearrange your whole entire house because you don't want it to remind you of your wife that left you. You might burn all of the items that belong to those people because it makes you angry to see them. You might, do all these different things. You might not want to take care of their dogs anymore if they left them. So I can totally see that. And that's what makes this so frustrating, is that it can technically be explained away by that sort of scenario. But again, when you pair that with the fact that they've never popped up anywhere, there's no reason why they would have stopped contacting the entire family. It's one thing for Susan to maybe do that, but for Evan, think about when you were 15 years old. Think about 15-year-olds nowadays. You mean to tell me he was taken away, his mom has forced him to leave his school, leave his friends, leave his home, leave his dad, leave his sister, leave everybody, and he's just calmly stayed quiet? I mean, I know all teenagers are different, but to me, that seems kind of like a situation where your teenager likely will rebel, likely won't be happy. And at the very least, they're still going to be curious. You would assume he would still try to log into Facebook maybe, or Instagram, to see what his friends have been doing, to see what he's missed over the summer. I don't know. This is where it being two different people that have disappeared makes this case so unique and different, because it would be, in my opinion, very difficult to run away, stay completely quiet, and have a 15-year-old supporting you all the way in that and not slipping up in the slightest bit in over 2 years at this point. I am very interested to see what you guys have to say down in the comment section down below. I already know there's going to be very strong opinions about this. I am very well aware, but just remember to be respectful. Innocent until proven guilty. Be careful what you say. Be careful of accusing people. Just keep it very clean and careful down in the comments section. My heart goes out to Susan and Evan's family because they've got a lot of questions that I'm sure they're wondering, and it can't be easy seeing someone that close to the situation act in the way that they did. But on that note, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Susan and Evan's story. Make sure you share it wherever you can, because this case has not really received a lot of attention, and because authorities are just waiting for any bit of physical evidence, any lead at this point to send them in any sort of direction, I mean, they are stuck until some tip comes through or something is found. So we definitely need this to keep circulating. We need people to think back if they saw anything, if they heard anything, if they've stumbled across anything. People need to come forward. As always, I will have all the information you need to contact authorities down in the description box below. And that's going to be it for me today, you guys. Thank you so much. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you have not already, to become a part of the Hallan fam so we can hopefully bring them home together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.